Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of CA Overwatch or CA Esports. I'm one of your hosts, Spencer. With me today is not Kris. Kris is actually still in Las Vegas. You guys saw last episode he had to leave, so we're joined again, thankfully, by obviously Michael. You guys would have recognized him from our last episode. Again, writer of Upcomer and even done some stuff at the Washington Post. So, Michael, give a quick introduction, and we can kind of jump into things.
Yeah, so he kind of got me the intro done already. Yeah, I'm a freelance writer, journalist. A lot of my coverage recently has been kind of a mix of Valorant, Overwatch, Halo, some other forays. I did the game review for the Washington Post, and I'm kind of getting back into things from the Overwatch League, and it's kind of nice just because, you know, it's been a while. 222 days in between the last season and this one, so it's kind of nice to be able to finally talk about results now instead of just hypotheticals.
Yeah, I know, and it's kind of, I mean, honestly, like, I don't love the significant breaks in between these Overwatch League seasons. I'm hoping that this year was maybe a little bit more so because of it's a new game. They wanted
Because
to
of
give
Overwatch 2.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm hoping that, you know, we get a lot less of that because it's the same with the Call of Duty League. I always find this, like, 3-4 month break in between the seasons so annoying. I'm like, man, you get especially the momentum off like the grand finals.
I'm pretty sure it's longer.
Well, significantly longer.
It was longer for Overwatch League.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like bring it down. I don't know. Anyways,
I think 4 months is okay if that's your max. Like
I would say 3. I would maximum do 3. Honestly, sometimes
yeah.
I get like a great, end of season. Give people some time vacation, get into free agency, and then give like a month to scrim, and then let's just jump into things. I'd rather a longer season with more tournaments.
Yeah. Obviously, this year is a different scenario, though.
100%. So I agree with you. I'm excited for things to be back. And if you're a Toronto Defiant fan, it was I gotta say probably the most Toronto Defiant opening you could have imagined. Right, with the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. You saw
very mixed bag.
It's such a Defiant thing, right? Of course, it's a mixed bag. They can never give us just, you know what I mean, just all the good stuff, right? There's always got to be pros and then cons, but thankfully we ended on a very well-deserved pro. So we'll quickly go and just give our recap.
Do you want to start with the Houston game, or do you want to start with
let's start with the Washington game, and then we'll go into Houston and just give our brief predictions for our next upcoming game versus the Paris Eternal. So
on this upcoming Sunday.
Yeah, the last game again. We got to wait a long time. So I mean, first and foremost, I think the Washington game was, I don't want to call it. In my opinion,
it was closer than it looked.
I
think we can both agree it was closer than it looked.
It was closer than it looked, and it was also like one of those losses that you almost think like can't happen. You're like, man, if Toronto is going to end up being this top tier team or really make a run,
this is one of those losses that you look to and being like, we can't have this again.
Exactly, right. You look at Dallas obviously losing to Houston 3-0, and you think, man, if you beat Washington, Houston, where do you finish in the standings, right? Especially if you make it close with Dallas or beat Dallas, you could finish top 3 going into the tournament, right? And maybe
the kickoff clash,
right? And potentially move forward in that. So I think there's a pretty good chance that either towards that kickoff clash or towards the end of the year, we look back at that Washington game and we're like, man, in a Monkey, Lucio, Ana, Soldier meta, we weren't able to pick up a victory against like the Washington Justice, the way that game started. That might come back to haunt us. But there was definitely some cons.
But also, relatively new team, first game of the season, new game. There's a lot of things you can point to for being like, the first game of the season obviously can sometimes be the toughest just because you're getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah.
But before I even mention the pro, we should go into depth or a little bit more in depth in the Washington.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just going to say.
Good start though, right, with the control map.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll let you give your thoughts here very quickly. But for me, the control was a great. I tweeted out that might have been the best map, and I think to this date, it's still the best map I've ever seen Toronto play. Mm-hmm. The whole organization. Coordinated against a good team, right? Is it it's not San Francisco, but Washington clearly has talent. They coordinate their dives. The support were working well. I was like, I forgot what it was like to watch a main tank engage and then get low and then properly disengage. I was like, holy shit, like they don't just die.
It's a nice mix between like never seeing that before really in a Toronto team, but also not seeing like a dive meta in a long time in the Overwatch League, so it's like a nice combo.
Exactly, right? You think of like Sato and Yakpung and we had Chain.
Where it'd be like, okay, he goes in, he gets a kill and he dies.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
He goes in, he goes away and he dies on the way back.
Yeah, even like as much as I love Numlock, there was obviously some moments there where he just went bull rushed in, and so.
But he was definitely more the Reinhardt than the Winston.
For sure, but what I'm just saying is like it was just a nice change of pace because right?
Yeah, totally.
It's been a while since we had a legit main tank who actually knew how to play the life. So I was really impressed. Hisu was going head to head. Finale, at least for the first part, I think the first map, Decay definitely outplayed him from the Genji perspective. But on that second stage, I was like, man, Finale's actually looking pretty good.
It was
Genji.
on Ruins there. I'm pretty sure they ended it on Ruins. And like Happy, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was either Happy or Decay. I can't remember exactly what it was. Yeah. And I think, yeah, but Happy swapped to Widow because it's Ruins, obviously, a long range map. And I remember him going on top of the, the Parthenon-esque area you have before the spawns. And he was just trying to get shots off. And even though Finale wasn't killing him, he was pressuring him with Muse enough where he couldn't get good shots off, force into bad positions. And then the rest of the team kind of just coordinated the rest. And it was just super refreshing to see because with Toronto, you kind of always have that aspect of like, okay, but you look at it with how are they going to mess this up, right? As opposed to how are they doing this right? You always look, at least with Toronto, you're used to seeing the choking, the negatives, that sort of thing, and just seeing them win a map cleanly against an opponent that's supposed to be around their skill level. It's just comfortable because a lot of those times they're one of those teams who like choke against teams in their tier, especially against ones higher than them, but then they beat up on the lower tier teams. Exactly. So it's kind of nice where they started with that
spoiler
map
alert,
win, but
they do choke it. They do pull a Defiant and choke it. But yeah, I was going to say, like, it just seemed like even in the past, whenever they would get like a map win versus San Francisco, like they've beaten, maps against good teams. I don't know why. It just always felt fluky. It was always like, oh man, they got a lucky ult, or like San Francisco
one person on Toronto popped off, and that was
random
kind of
pop.
led them to that
exactly. They're losing the game, and then he gets 3-piece, and they somehow squeak it out.
I remember that very specifically, that match against Shock last year, whenever I think it was like Aspire's like second game.
Yeah.
And he goes on Widow and Junkertown and just dumpsters the Shock.
Yeah.
But that was the only map they won.
And it always but it never like instilled confidence in me as a fan. Yes, I was always like, hey, they want a map?
Luck more than confidence, which
exactly.
was kind of just unfortunate.
This was complete opposite. This was a fantastic. I was like, oh my god, these guys like cleanly were like, there was never doubt while I was watching that start that I was like, they're not going to win this map. And I was like, this team's going to take this momentum. If they can beat Washington 3-0, 3-1, I'm fucking pumped for this game. Mm-hmm. And then the next map started, and we can kind of get in, and then everything just slowly fell apart.
Yeah, Midtown was almost the definition of the falling action in a story.
Yeah.
Because it started with, I believe, Washington on attack.
Yeah.
Toronto holds them off, I believe, for a minute or two on the first point, but Washington gets through the capture. And then Toronto holds them off long enough on the bridge section where Washington is just about to finish up the second point, like get to that little barrier that like finishes second. But Toronto holds them back using it was actually off of like a big sleep from Twilight. It hits the Winston, hits Mag, and since Mag is behind that little barrier where the cart ends, no one on his team can heal him. Mag gets finished, and then Hisu flanks the visor and cleans everyone up. So it was a really good start too, because like especially for those hybrid maps, usually stopping someone on second is just a really good sign, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because hybrids, either you full cap or you stop them on point A.
Because usually if you win the point one, right, you have the ult, you can kind of cycle them through.
You have the momentum to push to at least third. Yeah,
exactly. And I was going to say, I actually think it was even more held on first point. I swear by the time, because there was that weird thing where like Houston capped one tick, and then they got the second. Like Toronto almost, not Houston, Washington, full held Washington on that first point.
Yeah.
Like it was almost a full hold. So I came off of that and I was like, this team is looking incredible. Because you're right. Barely got through first point. Washington's not a bad team. Able to hold them on the second point, and then the attack happened, and they steamrolled them on first. It was like the first attack, and they capped it.
They had 4.5 minutes on second, yeah.
I was like, oh my god. Like, I think I tweeted out after
great position,
attack.
2-0, next
I was like, this is what I was looking for. I was wrong. I was eating my words. I was like, you know what? Maybe, Finale wasn't that bad of a pickup. Who needs Yaki? And I don't know necessarily what happened. I mean, obviously, like, listen, I want to put the entire game on someone like Finale.
Yeah.
Because
instead
that's
of pointing to one person, we can just say they weren't coordinated.
There
was a lot of times where they used ultimates poorly together, or like a pop-off moment happened again on the Washington side that just there was not really an adverse reaction, but just like the lack of a good reaction, or it just being they lose. And even though I'm pretty sure they got cart like kind of almost halfway up the ramp, going up around to where the second point ends. That's as far as it went, because as long as Washington held that upper area, there wasn't any coordinated attacks good enough to actually finish off the map.
And that's the problem, though, because with that much time, all you really have to do in this game is stack those ultimates and be able to get some picks. Some people are throwing away ultimates. Like I said, Finale just simply, it was one of those moments when you sit there and you look and you're like, okay, that's the difference between a top tier DPS player and that upper echelon on a championship caliber team and someone who's just a tier below. And that's not like saying he doesn't deserve to be in the league or he's not very good enough. It's just like, man, when you looked at the caliber of players that he was surrounded by and the caliber of team that I truly think Toronto can be, it wasn't the best look for him starting off. Now, he is a rookie, first game, right? absolutely could have been jitters
On his
because, like you
birthday,
said, on his
at that
birthday,
time.
the first map he looked fine, right? So maybe it was one of those things where, because he's a rookie, things kind of snowball, momentum starts to go a little bit, but that was
mental
definitely
gets chipped.
that was definitely the first moment where I was like, oh man,
The uneasiness. Yeah.
when's June coming back? But also two, it just kind of like struck a bit of a nerve where I was like, man, this is the exact reason why I think some people were hesitant and a little bit disappointed in the DPS lineup that Toronto was able to put forward. Because I felt like there was moments where, and this continues the whole game, where their team was better, right? Where they're like the better team per se, but then like Washington just had the ability in those scrappy fights to just, somebody could pop off and get a pick or
win
two
them a fight.
and win them a
any
fight that they didn't deserve. I felt like Toronto never won a fight that they didn't deserve, because as good as Hisu is, he really isn't that like upper echelon, like truly carry.
He's not going to win you fights you don't deserve to win.
Exactly.
He's going to close off. Like if you get an advantage, he's going to close it off.
Or he's going to set you up so that you deserve to win that fight. He's good enough to make you deserve to win that fight, but he's not like a Pelican or Decay or a Widow Happy.
He's not a game breaker.
Exactly. That's exactly my point. And I was like, man, I felt like watching that second map, I was like, man, do we need a game breaker, especially on DPS? Because we kind of had them on the support and tank, and we'll get to Muse later. But that was a moment where I was like, man, you're getting stalled. You just need someone to pop an ult and pop off and get one team fight to get that momentum back. And it just felt like we didn't have it. And I was like, oh, I want Yaki or somebody like that so bad. But anyways.
Well, but then I guess going into Circuit Royale, the less said, the better. Because that was the definition of, like, that's whenever we were talking about a game breaker. Happy was the game breaker in that map. On Widow especially, he just kind of, if I remember correctly, Toronto pushed first. After a little bit of time, they kept first point. That was just around that long little winding corridor there on the street. And then as soon as it gets to that high ground area, Happy goes Widow and just clicks heads to the point where Toronto can't do anything. Mm-hmm. They force swaps. And obviously the number one thing that I think most Toronto fans can agree on is that was one of the key issues was the Zarya pick and the lack of swaps.
Yeah, exactly. So I was going to say there was like three very, very quick things that I wanted to... We
could talk about this for like 30 minutes.
So one, let's very quickly, like, Hop Up, for instance, that was just simply put like a terrible map. Like, listen, I'm not going to put too much on him. It's one map. Obviously he has a ton of history and pedigree. It was again that was that moment where, I think some people were down on me because of how negative I was after that game. And I was like, man, the reason it just left such a bad taste in my mouth is like going into the year, everybody was like, man,
we felt this before. We felt this feeling before.
Exactly. It was like great roster, but why why Hotba and Finale? You know what I mean? Like, it just, I was like, okay, maybe they know something I don't. And then I saw them together and I was like, oh my God, they look terrible. Like, it was like, you know what I mean? I was like, oh,
it was your fears coming to light.
Exactly. And it just was amplified because you already had that expectation going into it. Now, again, first game, one map, right? I think that Hoppa was at a disadvantage because he was running a Zarya into one of the best Widowmakers in the entire Overwatch League.
Just got a way to duel everyone on the team without anything pressure.
Exactly. Now, I would say, I think in the entire match, both attack and defense, he had 2 Graviton Surges. He Gravitoned 2 people total, and he got 2 total kills and 0 team fight wins. So that's when I was like, oh, is he doing his best Michelle impressions? Like, regardless of first map or not, I feel like at some point you have to be a little bit better than that. I also would have liked to have seen them, either switch over to the dive to counter the Widow, or switch over at least to the Sigma to provide
Hisu some shielding. Yeah, because Hisu tried to mirror him with the Widow too. So.
Yeah, and people were pretty down on Hisu there. You know what? I don't think that Hisu, again, wasn't a game
He wasn't put in a position to succeed.
He wasn't put. Not only that, exactly, but also like, he's not as good a Widow as Happy. People were like really down on him, and I was like, hey, listen.
Happy is like top 3 Widow in the league.
Exactly. If you remove the Widow 1v1, I think he absolutely held his own, and in certain instances surpassed Happy from the hit scan. The only time I think there's a noticeable difference between the two was on Widow. So that was really it. One, it wasn't a great look for Hoppa. I'm excited to give him another chance, but it was a little bit concerning. 2, I would like to see in the future adaptations, because there's just no swaps on that map, I think, until the very, very end when Finale finally went Tracer, which thank God. Exactly, but it was too late at that point. And then, just let's not hit on Hisu too much, because it really was.
If there's one person I think that gets a pass, especially because he stayed with us from last year, it is Hisu.
Exactly.
And then obviously New Queen Street was super close, and I think that was definitely how do I say it? It wasn't the best way to end a game, but at least it wasn't like you got dumpstered in a final map, and that's like the worst way to end, I would argue, the series. It was super close, and it basically came up to a last fight where with spawn advantage, and with like good stagger touches from Washington, they managed to close it off. It was one of those things where, of course, you want to see them win. Of course, it was something that they probably should have won. A lot of people expected it because they were essentially, what was it, 1 meter before after they captured the bot. And just with the time the bot took to remove again, and with the stalls that Washington came in, it was just not enough time for them to do it and clutch the fight. But at the same time, I think people look at how they played on New Queen Street with the context of how they play with Circuit Royale, which obviously was a lot worse. So, obviously, if you're looking back in that series, you probably should have won Midtown. You had a big time bank heading to the second point. Close. And you probably should have won New Queen Street. And even if you, like you said, if you do that, it's a 3-1. It's a 3-1 for Defiant, and that's a close but a 3-1 win. It kind of goes to show how the score line is a bit misleading.
No, for sure. And that's like one of the things that I noticed is at the end of that game, I was like, man, obviously that's when I was like, one, we need that game breaker. Because I remember that final fight. I didn't go back and rewatch it, but I remember specifically, I felt like Toronto was at the advantage even after the bot started to move. So them losing was another emphasis where I was like, it's just because it gets those scrappy fights, people's nerves are pumping, the adrenaline's hitting.
Toronto dies at that moment. Their spawns are longer and farther away.
And in that moment, when everything's hitting the fan and your adrenaline's pumping, I'm like, that's when you need your game breakers and your best players to step up. And that's when I'm like, man, I just wish this team had one of those on their DPS. And it was pretty apparent. I will say, though, this was the positive, and I think this carried a lot into the Houston game. I think earlier than we had seen previously, Finale finally realized, you know what, Genji's just not cutting it. For whatever reason, it was nerves or just something not good enough. It just wasn't cutting it, and he swapped the Tracer a lot earlier than we saw previously.
I think he swapped like a minute or two in.
And it was working. It was working pretty well. And so as much as I was down on him for his Genji, I even tweeted out, once my like anger kind of subsided a little bit, I was like, you know what, like, as much as I was, I think rightfully so, shitting on Happy or Finale for a while there, his Tracer wasn't bad. And I like the fact that he at least gave it a shot. And this really leads us back in the Houston game because I think he noticed that, like, at some point in time, it's better to just play what you're good at as opposed to trying to force a strategy that clearly isn't working. I felt like map 3 was them trying to force a strategy that clearly wasn't working. And in map 4, I don't know if they had the break or KDG got in the mic or whatever. You saw a point when they're like, okay, this isn't working. Screw it. I'm just going to play a Tracer, which I'm obviously better at. And you started to see the wheels starting to turn, and Defiant actually started to make some progress. And I think that's exactly what happened in the Houston game. So any final thoughts about Washington before we move on here? Because I want to kind of...
No, I'm kind of leading into the Houston game almost. Do you know what the Monty theorem is?
No.
It's something that's sort of coined. It's based off of Monte Cristo, like the former Overwatch League guy.
Yeah, I figured.
CSGO reporter, and this was also dubbed, I believe, in the Avast community, which I'm a big follower and fan of. The Monty theorem was, I'm pretty sure, from what I remember, first brought to light whenever Houston in 2020 or 2021.
Oh, the GOAT. I do know. Yeah, it's the GOATs, right?
And the idea that, like, it's the same idea where, GOATs is the prevalent meta, but if you're a team that can't play GOATs well, it's, maybe this wasn't the best example of the time since GOATs was so important.
I know what you mean, though.
But it kind of
just run the 3 DPS, right?
Play who you're best at. Play who you're best at because you'll probably have a better chance of playing it than forcing something you're not good at.
Yeah.
And that's kind of leading itself into Finale. And obviously going into the Houston game, everyone's like, okay, well, the Washington performance was a letdown. It was close, but especially after Houston swept Dallas, which no one expected.
Exactly.
I think it was fair to say that we were kind of all like, okay, well, it's 0-2 for this week. Let's see what happens next.
Yeah.
But yet again, just like the game against Washington, control was pretty clean. It was definitely closer because it was I believe 2-1 when it came to rounds instead of the 2-0 against Washington. But besides Control Center, which I believe is the one that they lost, they looked solid.
No, they looked good. And this was it. That was almost like the worst parts in some ways. Is like, man, there was moments where like Finale was playing really well with this team. They were coordinated, and I was like,
it's the hope.
They look fantastic. But I was like, is this an issue of like Finale with nerves, or is that just simply he's just one of those players because he's not at the upper echelon, he can't reach that level consistently? Because every time he was making good plays, I was like, oh shit, this is a really, really good team. So yeah, they end up going again. They beat Houston. And I think the biggest thing for me was, again, as soon as the game started, I think Finale goes out on the Genji, immediately dies. I think he's on the Genji for about 5 seconds, and he just immediately dies and swaps a Tracer. And I was like, you know what, respect. because he
and to be fair, I think he swapped it for. I didn't think he just swapped it because he died. I think he swapped it as soon as he saw the Echo, because
it's possible.
Echo because a Genji against Echo is just not good. You're gonna get beamed as soon as you get low, and you can get focused a lot easier and a lot faster if you don't have your dash as opposed to a Tracer. A Tracer can at least poke her if she gets close.
So my only counterpoint would be, you might be right, but honestly, if that was the reason, then you knew they had Dante and Pelican, and you knew they were going to run Doomfist Echo. So I don't know why you even come out there in the
Pelican's been kind of swapping between the Echo and the Genji map dependently.
So I wouldn't really say he mostly ran the Echo versus Dallas. It's kind of the hero he was known for. And it works better, I think, with the Doomfist anyways, because again, you can kind of engage there a little bit more frequently. Anyways, whatever. So
either way,
maybe you're right, but
out.
It doesn't matter because exactly. He swaps the Tracer immediately, and I was like, this is another moment that I wanted to see earlier, was that adaptation out of them. And I think it worked really well. I think the Tracer is a better pick versus the Doomfist and the Echo. And I think that the team looked significantly better, when he was on the Tracer, because I think it actually allowed him to engage and disengage a lot easier. Right? He has the blinks, he has the recall. Unlike Genji, where you deflect, right? That's your typical way to disengage.
Echo beam,
Echo beam goes through it. Doomfist can punch through it. So, while I think the team overall, this was a really promising game and a lot of positives to take away. And I don't think we need to go as in depth as we did with Washington. Part of me is just a little bit concerned, slightly, that again, this was an instance where maybe we overlaid Houston because of how they performed versus Dallas. Because on paper, this is definitely a game Toronto should have won, right? Compare Lasher on Lucio to Churong. Churong's better. Compare Iris
on had such a good control map.
Phenomenal map. Phenomenal map. Compare Twilight to Iris on Ana. Twilight's better, right? Compare.
But they're a lot closer than Lasher.
They're closer, but I still agree. Yeah. I still think Twilight's the noticeably better flexible player. Maybe not noticeably, but I think he's a better one. You compare like even Muse on main tank to Dante, right? I think Muse is better.
Or Piggy if they come in.
Exactly, but they just ran Dante. So I think because they ran Dante and the lack of flexibility, I still think Muse is a better tank. And I think Hisu at the very 100%. Least is a wash with merit, if not better. So I was like, this is a roster on paper that they should just be better across the board. And I think had the Houston game not swept Dallas, I think that like maybe everyone was a little bit all over the place high. There.
It was recency bias. It happens. Yeah. It happens in all sports.
So my last point, and I know it's a little bit long-winded, but I just slightly worried that we're maybe even overhyping Toronto a little bit here because they were to beat Houston. Only because, was this Toronto finally finding the form, or was this somebody exposing Houston's lack of flexibility?
Yeah, it's always that tough decision of like, are you playing good or did they play bad?
Because Houston obviously has a talent, but exactly Finale went Tracer, and he's not striker on Tracer, but he played obviously a lot better. Tracer very much counters the Echo and the Doomfist significantly better than the Genji does, right? I'm just worried about what happens when you come across a team that's able to adjust to that, and then their tank player can switch over to like Monkey or Sigma or whoever, and the other player can start playing Genji to go alongside of them. Because again, Pelican swapped over to Genji, and I actually was able to again beat Toronto when he was on the Genji.
It was
but Dante just had no ability to switch off of the Doomfist. You just always knew he was running Doomfist, and you never had to worry about any other possibility. And so I'm slightly worried, not against necessarily Paris, but when you start to play these better teams, if this is an instance
Shock Atlanta,
all they have to do now, I think, is prep for Finale's Tracer, and I'm just a little bit worried that Toronto might not be able to keep it going.
And while I do completely agree, it's also one of the benefits now of Tracer with the CC changes, where tanks are the ones who give the CC and not the DPS. There's less hard counters to Tracer now.
Yeah, exactly.
The same way, and that's why both Genji and Tracer are good, because there's nothing to stun them. There's nothing to freeze 100%. them. There isn't that immediate counter, right? You have to coordinate more as a team to stop them. Yeah. So I feel like, while I do completely agree with you that Toronto might be a bit overrated, and if they prep against Finale's Tracer, they'll do better, I also am of the light where it's going to be harder to prep against a Tracer than it was in previous years. So, and not to mention too, I just feel like in general, if Finale can build its confidence and find a strat, especially as a rookie player, we could be seeing an even better Tracer in the next coming games. It could be me might be able to improve as a Genji. There's always those asterisks that we don't know just because we're fans looking at their in-game performances. We don't know how scrims are going. We don't know how they're feeling. There's a lot of things that we don't know.
And the last thing is, this is my opinion isn't they are overrated because of this. I'm more so just proposing a question, right? Like you saw it in Washington.
You're being cautious. That's understandable.
The first control map, right? They went up there and everyone was like in love with control and was great. But also at the same time, we were able to play Monkey with Muse. And Washington had Kalios in, right? The second they mirrored Toronto, things got a lot closer, and Washington ended up winning. because they brought Meg in, and then all of a sudden you had Meg versus Muse, and things were a little bit different than Kalios versus Muse. I'm slightly worried that you're going to see a similar thing where even if they don't hard counter Toronto's strategy, maybe they just mirror and they're able to mirror it better, right? Maybe you go up against, not this next game, but you go up against Boston, which you should win, but Boston puts Striker on Tracer, and they put, I guess, Marvel on Monkey, but
probably Marvel Winston. That makes more sense.
But still, and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, we should be winning this game, but Striker's popping off, and then who knows? So the last thing I want to talk about this game before we kind of wrap things up here and just give our quick Paris predictions is I mentioned it earlier about what it was like to finally see a main tank, not feed his life away. I cannot tell you how impressed I was with Muse. This was a player who I knew about going into the year, but you're right. The last couple months, I think, was just people kind of dogging on him because there was that interview with DPA from the Gladiators.
Yeah.
And I don't think this completely reverts that, because the truth is, I think no one ever said Muse had a bad monkey. It was always his concern around his flexibility, and
I'm pretty sure it was mostly his rhyme.
We've only seen him on monkey, so while I am gassing up, it's still important to note it's only been his monkey, but he legitimately looks like one of the best tanks in the league. When there was people, we even talked about this a week ago. You watch our show, we'd say, hey, you know what? Their support line's S tier. I'm a little bit worried about the DPS, but as long as their tanks can do their job, maybe we're okay. I think that's not true. Because I think we saw versus Houston and Washington, our tanks can't just do their job and we'll win. No, we actually need our tanks to kind of carry. But also, too, Muse on Monkey is so much better than just doing his job. Like, he legitimately looked phenomenal. And yes, obviously some of that is
that new Queen Street map for the Houston game was basically all Muse just being like, okay, I'll win it for us.
Yeah, and not only was
and then the control map was more of a team effort.
Yeah, his engages and disengages were fantastic. He played his life well, but also his juggle mechanics, his primal was...
That's the thing, too. His primals have definitely been some of the best I've seen. Because I've basically watched every game this opening weekend.
Yeah.
And I think that while we've seen a lot of Winston just because it's prevalent with the Genji, with the Ana, with the Lucio, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
As opposed to like a Ryan. It's like a lot of what Winston brings to the table right now is more so having the bubble, being able to get the Genji down because obviously he can zap him out without much aim, and he has that capability of being able to back up as well as engage. But I think there's only been a couple Winstons in the league who've been using primals to the same extent that Muse does, where it's like two kills every time. And I think the only other person you can compare him to, at least in my opinion, is Reiner on the Glads. Like he also had a great games on Winston, but Muse was because Muse's role, like he needed to do that for the game. It showed off even more how good he can be.
And obviously, it's possible that he's enabled by our back line, which I think is you saw Sato with Funny Astro and Alarm, and then you saw Sato with Lastro and Onsen J. It was two very different tanks.
Yes, but two different sides of the coin.
At the same time, I also think that this is like there's some debate now. Do you go Doomfist? Do you go Monkey? And one of the reasons I lean so heavily into Monkey is because I think people are really underrating how valuable Primal is as an ult
and the shield
in
like, just the idea of having the bubble is also super good.
But I think people always see the bubble is good because it was good in 6v6. What I'm saying is
it was never bad.
Primal kind of was, right? Nobody thought, oh man, they got Primal, that's a team fight win in 6v6, at least not for a while, maybe in like season 1,
maybe early,
there
but
was
not
so
like later,
much CC and Overwatch. I felt like Primal,
Stun, slowed,
if anything, was just it was just like a way to
put a target on your back and keep yourself alive longer.
Exactly. Keep yourself alive and maybe create some space. I think with 5v5 and no stuns, Primal's a legitimate threat.
If the Ana doesn't hit the sleep on you, it's over.
And I think that Muse doesn't work in the loop. There's a couple times he Primal and immediately got slept. I'm like, hey, Muse, you got to bait that out.
Same thing happened with Twilight,
for sure.
Vice versa.
And so that's one of the reasons I think that Winston's a lot better, not a lot better than Doom, because I think that his ult is like actually team fight winning.
A lot better now with 5v5.
A lot better in 5v5, and not enough people are talking about that. So he blew my. I was incredibly impressed by Muse. This took, I think, one of my things of like, oh, I'm worried about our tank line. I'm now like, okay, maybe we just need to get up, look at someone like Max or Attack, for instance, in Korean contenders, because Muse might be the kind of player that you end up building around if he's able to also improve his Reinhardt play and maybe, throw in like a Sigma or a Doom or Orisa or whomever has to be put in because of new Overwatch, because his monkey was seriously incredible.
Yeah, and another thing that we don't even know right now, which obviously I don't think I'm being controversial when I'm saying that almost everything I heard about Wrecking Ball from the Overwatch 2 beta was that he was not playable, or at least not good enough for the competitive scene, the same way that like a couple other tanks are right now.
Yeah.
And obviously he wasn't even available because of a bug. So he wasn't even available to choose for this first weekend. So for all we know, there might be a team that just goes, just screw it and plays ball next week, but I don't think it's going to happen. Yeah. My point, though, is that I think Muse was his best whenever he played ball with the Gladiators. So I'd be kind of interested to see if ball becomes something that returns back to the fray, whether that's next week, a month from now, 2 months from now, we could see another same layer of Muse carrying the team again. So I feel confident in Muse because I don't think Ryan's ever going to be as meta as he was in previous years.
So I agree with you about Ryan. I actually, people are really high on him. I don't think so. And I also think he plays differently, but too.
He's super map specific, and even then you could argue other tanks are better.
If Muse's ball is better than his monkey, I went into this year and I was like, you know what, Muse works great. I never really necessarily, I saw more as a placeholder until you found your main tank. It's only 2 games. I don't want to overreact, but he's seriously looking like the kind of guy you legitimately build around with Churong and Hisu. Twilight, just because of age, who knows? But, prime Twilight, absolutely, right? And there's no questions. Yeah. And I was like, my God, if something like Doomfist, for instance, which is also mechanically challenging and, has a higher skill ceiling in some ways, if they release these new characters and, Ball also is one of those ones that a little bit more higher mechanical ceiling.
Yeah, very
similar to Winston, right? Is it out of the realm of possibility that Muse can also not potentially, pick up a Sigma or a Doomfist or a new tank that comes out?
We'll have to see.
We'll have to see, but just seeing him how good he's been so far I'm very optimistic.
Yeah, and I guess to sort of finish this off, when it comes to you were mentioning other off tanks that were on the market, what was it?
Max and Attack. Those are the 2 ones I like, and it's too early for Hoppa, but.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I think we'll see what happens, and obviously we'll see if the Defiant think the same way.
Yeah.
But I personally think that, give Hoppa a couple more chances, maybe a couple more maps here and there, depending on what maps you think work best for his hero pool, what he can do. And I would say even, make him learn the Doom, because it looks right now that the most common 2 tanks right now are Winston and Doom, and, Ryan's, a third with, a lot of with London and Vancouver. Yeah. But either way, I would say that, try and get him to learn the Doom, and then that way if he learns the Doom and can play it well, you'd probably have a nice 2-team duo of we have Muse to play the Winston, the Ball if it becomes viable, and the Ryan maybe a little bit more worrying, but he can play it. And then you have Hotba who can play the Doom, the Zarya, the D.Va, so on.
Yeah, my very, very, very last thing. I know we've been going on so much longer.
Well, we still have the Paris spreads, but
but that'd be very quick though. I'm just saying though, it kind of became clear to me when I watched this team purely because of our DPS lineup that in order for this team to be successful, I think as they need to be and win, they need their tanks to have that ceiling as Muse. Think about that. We just barely beat Houston. And I don't think Houston is, especially not in this meta, that has a main support and a main tank, in the same top tier as your San Francisco Shock and Atlanta Reign. They did sweep Dallas, so maybe they are. But we'll see if teams are able to figure that out.
At least they've shown they have the capability.
But what I'm saying is we barely beat them, and we were only able to do that because I think Muse legitimately looked like a superstar in that game. Mm-hmm. My worry is even if Hoppa comes in there and plays a Doom and plays a D.Va and is better than what we saw in Zarya, because
it still might not be good.
I still don't think his ceiling is what we saw with Muse. And one of the reasons why I brought up somebody like Attack or somebody like Max, or even, we talked about last show, do you go for a Decay if that becomes available? Or somebody like Scrapka, wherever his name is, from Contenders, right? He turns 18 in August. Because their ceiling is that high. Because I think when you have players like that, they can do a lot. And I just don't know if we put Hoppa in there and it's lower than Muse if we're still as successful. So, that's my last sort of thoughts here. Obviously, things are still early. I'm very excited to see how we do against Paris. And not too much to say. Honestly, this should be a win. I think even if Paris is able to counter...
Even if Paris overperforms, I don't see them win this game.
Yeah, even if they overperform, but also my thing of what if somebody mirrors us? What if they, are able to prep...
They don't seem as flexible.
Against Finale's Tracer. Exactly. Not only are they not as flexible, I just don't think they have the firepower. Unless Glister just completely hits prime.
Glister will have to have a pop-off game.
Absolutely. But even still, I think with what we've shown and Dive being as meta as it is and our backline, I think it's going to be a 3-1. I still think Paris actually does have enough talent on that roster. I like their team a lot, to be honest. And I think once they figure out their full tank situation, and obviously if they can get Poco in there playing, they have the potential to...
Poco's on Spitfire, not
Eternal. Mixed up. Who's there off? Visola,
yeah.
I was mixed up. Visola still, I think, has a lot of potential as well.
Yeah, Visola's still great.
So if they're able to figure that out, and, they could probably take a map. Naga's really good, right? Khan, high ceiling players. I just think Toronto's just more consistent. So I expect it to be 3-1. I wouldn't be surprised. But I'm more confident it's going to be a 3-0 than a 3-2, but I'm going to say 3-1. How about you?
Yeah, I think I'm honestly going to stick with 3-0, and the idea of a sweep for me comes off of one thing. I'm not very confident it's a 3-0, but I am confident that off of what we've seen recently, that Dawn seems to be way more comfortable on the Ryan than the Winston.
Exactly.
And if that's true, I feel like Toronto is going to be able to play around that with Twilight, with Muse, and even if Hisu and Finale don't play as good as they did in that Houston game and the maps that they won, I feel like just having that Winston and having that better coordination with dives in your team will matter more in the end. I think in that way, there might be some maps that are super close, but I feel like unless Dawn swaps to Winston and performs to the same level that Muse did, not even in the pop-off moments, even just like to the same level as Muse, I still think Toronto wins. So I would say a 3-0.
And I agree. I think that this is a great opportunity for Toronto to build their confidence back up, right? Because a confident, like the way that they won Control, where you're like, you know what, you deserve to win. This was not luck. If you have that level of play for a sweep against a team like Paris, which isn't, if you do that versus like Vancouver, it's like, okay, that's great, but it's Vancouver. A team like Paris they're talented, right? If you're able
they're definitely more, they're closer to us on the rankings than Vancouver.
And rightfully so. They have legitimate, I think, really, really high-end talent on that team. So if we're
Con especially.
Con is fantastic. I like Glister and Naga. Like Glister and Naga, I think both of them have very high ceilings. Maybe some of them have they also have the lows, but their ceilings are very extremely high. So if we're able to put together a confident performance like that and Finale can kind of start coming into form, I think this might, again, just allow their momentum to go through the roof and really carrying it towards their next game versus a team like the Dallas Field, where they're definitely going to need it.
Yeah, and I guess sort of to end this all off, I think this win against Houston, especially off of, we were kind of been talking, or at least I mentioned a couple times the recency bias of like Houston being Dallas, but then Dallas losing to Washington, or Dallas beating Washington, but then Washington beat us, even though we beat Houston, so it's like a circle, right? Every team beats each other.
When Dallas
so it kind of goes to show that a lot of it's matchup dependent, so we can't really go off of like this team beats this team, therefore they beat this team. That's not really how it is, at least to start off this season. And I feel like when it comes to Toronto especially, even with knowing that, I feel like the general consensus of where teams are ranked, there's been no major surprises so far. I think everyone understands where everyone is if you're to put them in tiers. I think the tiers are still relatively comfortable. And I would say that with those tiers in context, I think there's no way, or if there's a very, very little chance, I'm not going to say no way and get memed on, but I say there's no way Toronto loses to Paris. And I feel like they have a pretty good... They're coming off of a high, especially with Houston, too. So I think they'll be going into Paris in good spirits.
If Toronto loses to Paris, I'm flying to Korea and I'm picking up all to myself and I'm bringing him over. He's going to 30-day vacation. He's not even having a work visa. He's just living with me. He's my boy. Like, I swear to God, if we lose versus... he's coming over.
But what would be hilarious, especially, is if we pull off of Houston, where we lose to Paris, we beat Dallas. I think that'd be pretty funny.
No, I wouldn't be funny because I would have already leapt off my balcony. I would already be on my way to Korea. By the time they beat Dallas, I wouldn't even know what happened. But anyways, man, thanks. Yeah, I think this would be a good 3-1, 3-0. I think you might be closer than I am. But thanks so much for coming on. We kind of, I think we've rambled on here long enough, but I always think it's a really good conversation. Fun back and forth. It's always a pleasure having you on the show. Again, everyone, if you enjoyed, give them a follow on Twitter. I put your link in the description below. Subscribe.
Get the like and the subscribe button as well.
Do all that fun stuff. Follow us on Twitter. Honestly, that's where most of our stuffs are. If you want to see my my rants after the game and my really, really hot upset takes, that's where you should kind of go. So again, guys, thanks so much. And as always, enjoy.